I met a friend for coffee last weekend, someone who had, just successfully negotiated a 4-day work week. And you'd expect him to be the picture of relaxation, right? Glowing with this newfound freedom we all think we crave. But the reality was, it was really unsettling. He was sitting there physically with me, but his leg was bouncing the whole time. And every time there was a pause in the conversation, he'd just instinctively reach for his phone, unlock it, stare at a totally blank screen, and then lock it again. He told me he'd spent his whole Friday off trying to force himself to be productive, learning a language, hitting the gym, optimizing his schedule, because the idea of just doing nothing. He said it gave him this crushing sense of guilt. He called it a phantom vibration in his brain. Even with the office closed, his mind was still running at high heat, like a car engine that just keeps ticking and popping long after you've cut the ignition. It was just such a jarring contradiction. I mean, here was a guy who had won the ultimate battle for more time, the linear, quantifiable hours on a clock that we're all told are the solution to burnout. Yet now that he had it, he seemed more exhausted, more frantic than when he was working 6 days a week. And it made me realize his rest had been completely colonized by the logic of work. He wasn't resting at all. He was just furiously treading water like a hummingbird flapping its wings just to stay in the exact same spot. This disconnect, it forces us to ask a pretty terrifying question. If getting more hours off doesn't actually make us feel rested, what are we even fighting for? It suggests that our entire understanding of time as this, resource to be saved or spent or filled, that might be the very thing trapping us in this cycle of exhaustion. So today we're going to dismantle the clock and look at why modern rest feels so much like work.
That friend, that's every single one of us, isn't it? In some way. We hit the goal, we get more time, but that feeling of exhaustion just gets deeper. This feeling of rest without rest, or as some researchers in China have actually named it, shi jian bu xi, it's pronounced something like shi bu xi. And it means, basically, that rest itself has become corrupted.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We have to look past the conventional wisdom that says our burnout is just, a shortage of minutes or hours. For decades, we've tried to solve it by fighting for these quantitative boundaries, a 4-day week, a right to disconnect law, or just blocking out time on a calendar. But those solutions they're just not enough. They only treat time as a linear thing.
They do. They really do. They assume if you just add more space on the ruler, the problem is solved. But the true source of this pervasive chronic exhaustion, it's not in the length of the time you have. It's in the quality and the complexity of all the connections and obligations that fill that time. We have to move beyond thinking of time as a measurable asset and explore this much more systemic concept, relational time.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Relational time. If we're moving away from the clock, from that ruler metaphor, what is the new lens we're using? What does that actually look like?
I think the best way to visualize it is as a network. It's not a single straight railroad track measured by seconds. Think of it instead as an incredibly complex, interconnected railway map. Your time is defined not by how long one piece of track is, but by how tangled the whole system is and how many different destinations or, obligations you're simultaneously connected to.
A network, okay.
Yeah, and this idea is really anchored by 3 core characteristics. First, and this is the big one, time is not a fixed asset you can hold. It is a network of interactions, events, and relationships. In physics, some theories even suggest that time itself just arises from the relationships between things. It isn't some independent dimension. So our lived experience of time is really just the flow of these connections.
So my time isn't just my time. It's a byproduct of the entire network I'm plugged into.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which leads right to the second characteristic.
Yeah.
The key is the quality of connection. Are you giving focused, deep attention to something? Or is your attention shallow, scattered, constantly being fragmented by interruptions? You can spend an hour on, say, shallow, obligatory admin tasks that just leave you totally depleted. Or you can spend that same hour in a state of deep, creative flow that's actually restorative. Same amount of time, radically different feeling.
And you feel that difference. That's why those productive Fridays my friend was trying to have felt worse than work. The quality of that forced leisure was still tied to these external productivity metrics.
Precisely. And the third characteristic is probably the hardest one to grapple with. Time isn't purely individual, it's relational and shared. Your ability to have any autonomy over your time is constantly being shaped by social norms, by expectations, by the time needs of everyone else in your network. Your manager expecting an instant response, the social pressure to maintain a certain image online, your kids needing things at the same time, all of these external factors are squeezing the quality and availability of your own personal time. You're always navigating a time network that was partially designed by other people.
So if relational time is the network, then the central problem we're all facing, the reason for this constant exhaustion, is that the network itself has been, well, systematically corrupted. We're not suffering from a scarcity of time, we're suffering from a corruption of time.
And this corruption, it shows up in three systemic confines or locks that keep us trapped. And we really need to dig into these because they explain exactly why policies designed to fix linear time, like the 4-day work week, often just fall flat.
Okay, so let's start with the first lock. This one deals directly with the boundaries we thought we had. Lock 1, fuzzy boundaries, the erosion of gray time.
Right. Fuzzy boundaries. This happens when the lines between our different social roles, the worker, the parent, the friend, the student, are constantly being blurred. Traditionally, when you left the office, that cognitive engine for your work self was supposed to shut down. The physical boundary of the workplace was supposed to create a mental and emotional boundary.
But the digital age just blew that wall down.
Yeah.
Now, when the engine of work is turned off, the heat, the emotional residue, that cognitive load of unfinished business, it just radiates outward. It penetrates the next space you're in. And that's what this gray time is. You're physically at home, but mentally, you're still performing labor.
And this gray time makes real rest impossible. You can't rest because you're constantly monitoring for potential emergencies or just checking the relational standing of your absence. We see this so acutely in the tech sector, especially in places with hyper-competitive cultures like China's 996 culture, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. And, people have tried to combat this with policy.
Which brings us to the story of Chen in Shenzhen. It's just a perfect illustration of what you could call the failure of linear policy.
It really is. So Chen was a project manager at a big tech company. And they had instituted a formal right to disconnect policy. No mandatory meetings, no emails after 7 p.m. And Chen was diligent. He physically left his desk at 7:30 p.m. He believed he was compliant and, more importantly, that he was protected by this rule. The policy had fixed the linear time boundary.
But of course, the disconnect failed. I think his director posted a link, right, about some industry article with a comment like, interesting trend, in a non-mandatory group chat. It wasn't a direct task, wasn't an official email. And Chen spent his entire 45-minute commute home just agonizing over that one simple message. He wasn't spending that time thinking about the content of the trend. His entire cognitive load was dedicated to calculating the relational cost of not responding immediately.
That is the essence of gray time anxiety. He's thinking, if I don't reply in the next 5 minutes, will I seem uncommitted? What about my peers who are already replying? Are they going to be seen as more dedicated? What does my director think of me now that I've let this sit here for 20 minutes?
The policy fixed the quantitative time requirement, but it was totally powerless against the cultural pressure and the relational anxiety. The heat from the work engine followed him right home through that communication network. That anxiety, that internal performance review he's giving himself, that is the invisible labor of gray time.
It's performing emotional labor just to maintain your professional standing while you're simultaneously trying to rest. And for so long, this was completely unrecognized as actual work. But that seems to be changing. The law is slowly starting to catch up to this idea of relational time. Yes, and that landmark Beijing court ruling involving an employee named Li is a huge turning point. She successfully sued her former employer for over 500 hours of unpaid overtime. And it was accrued entirely through digital communication.
The employer's argument was basically that these frequent texts on WeChat after hours, on weekends, on holidays were, necessary but informal, not structured, compensable labor.
The court fundamentally disagreed. The ruling made the employer pay her a significant sum, recognizing her text exchanges as fixed and periodic, and therefore as overtime work. This ruling officially recognized after-hours digital labor as invisible overtime.
What's so powerful about that is the legal precedent. It's the first time in China that text messaging was officially considered substantial labor. It shifted the focus from the medium, it's just a text, to the quality of the connection. If the network demands periodic fixed attention from you, it is labor. And that's a crucial protection of an employee's right to actually be offline, validated by the state.
And this legal recognition just highlights the hidden cost of the emotional labor that's baked into these fuzzy boundaries. Gray time isn't just wasted time. It's an active, invisible draining of our energy. We are constantly managing conflicts, performing social networking, handling all these relational duties like listening to a colleague vent that are incredibly draining, even if they aren't on our official job description.
And that just ensures that our relational time reserves are constantly being depleted. We never get to that depth of disengagement that you need for real restoration.
Which leads us perfectly into our second lock. If Lock 1 was about those blurry borders radiating heat, Lock 2, Interwovenness, the connection syndrome, is about being completely trapped in a tangled web where the different threads of our lives are basically inseparable.
Interwovenness. So that's the intense entanglement of work, social life, and family time, where all these different needs and obligations are constantly in conflict. It's like trying to navigate that complex transportation map where every single line crosses every other line and every destination is demanding your presence at the exact same time, making it impossible to choose your own route.
And this really defines what we're calling the connection syndrome, where being continuously available isn't just encouraged, it's necessary for survival within the social and professional structure. To really get the intensity of this, we have to look at Seoul, South Korea.
Right, and this is that powerful, almost heartbreaking story of Jiwoo, a 28-year-old marketing strategist living in Gangnam, which is, the heart of South Korea's hyper-competitive corporate world.
So Jiwoo recognized her own dependence on her device. She saw the problem. So she participated in a community-based digital detox weekend. The idea was simple. Physical removal. They lock your phone away for 48 hours to force a break and restore some balance.
But the result was completely the opposite of what you'd expect. Instead of feeling relief, she felt this profound physiological spike in cortisol. She had intense anxiety and a total loss of time autonomy. She actually felt less safe, unprotected.
And the analysis of why that happened is so critical. For many of us, the phone is a distraction, maybe an addiction. But for Jiwoo, and for so many people in these hyper-hierarchical cultures, the phone was a survival mechanism. It was her only tool for navigating the structural time inequality of her workplace.
The second she was disconnected, her brain was just frantically calculating all the relational costs and social debts that were piling up in her absence. Silence wasn't rest for her. Silence meant failing a social test. She was afraid she was cutting her lifeline to the very network that determines her professional status. She needed to be able to respond instantly, not because she loved working, but because being unresponsive could be seen as insubordination or a lack of commitment.
It's a devastating insight, really. It means that genuine leisure, true disconnection, it requires a social safety net that actively validates your offline existence. Without that validation, being disconnected feels like professional suicide, and that traps you in this continuous state of anxious preparedness.
And this all ties into the bigger picture of South Korea's historical overwork crisis. They have some of the longest working hours in the industrialized world, which is a legacy that's tied to the country's rapid economic growth after the Korean War.
And that extreme pressure has fueled a real mental health crisis among young people. Surveys show a really high percentage of young Koreans are at risk for depression, and it's driven not just by the hours, but by financial insecurity, perceived job failures, and this kind of structural low-wage employment that makes the sacrifice feel, well, meaningless in the end.
This disillusionment has driven the MZ generation, that's millennials and Gen Z, to actively rebel. We're seeing mass quitting from professionals like Lee Sang-hyuk, a 35-year-old who left a major pharmaceutical company because of severe back pain, anxiety, and a complete dissolution of his personal life, all of which he directly attributed to excessive unpaid work hours.
Their rejection is fundamentally a cultural critique. They're realizing that all their intense hard work often doesn't actually translate to career progression or financial stability, and that leads to this profound disappointment. They're rejecting that whole internalized culture of self-sacrifice.
And this rebellion really manifested on a political level in 2023. The government there proposed revising the labor system to allow up to a 69-hour work week. The idea was to give companies more flexibility.
But the pushback from young workers and unions was immediate, and it was fierce. They saw the policy, correctly, as being completely detached from the reality of time inequality. They called it irresponsible and inhumane. They saw it as just putting into law the exploitation they were already facing.
The sheer force of the protests and the public outcry actually forced the government to back down, which just shows the immense power of this youth movement in rejecting that entrenched assumption that their personal time exists only to serve the corporate structure.
And this brings us to the core mechanism of this second lock, time inequality. This concept explains how certain relational demands just automatically assume a higher privilege in the network hierarchy, forcing everyone else to adjust.
So how does that inequality show up in daily life? What does that look like?
Well, it's the boss's late-night message that you have to answer. It's the sudden, non-optional meeting that gets thrown on your calendar. Or, and this is critical in the Korean context, it's the forced social drinking rituals known as hosik. Hosik is an obligatory, highly structured social thing that extends work demands deep into your personal time. It often involves heavy drinking and these hierarchical displays of loyalty. It's a work requirement disguised as leisure.
So Hosek isn't just hanging out with coworkers, it's another layer of emotional and social performance that maintains the relational structure of the workplace. And it automatically trumps any personal plans you might have had.
Precisely. These demands automatically prioritize the needs of the employer or the senior figure, forcing the individual to just continually adjust and sacrifice their personal time. The data backs this up too. Young Koreans are leaving jobs because of poor pay and no work-life balance.
But the most revealing stat I saw was this. 59% of respondents in one survey said they face unpaid overtime. And many of them said they would stay in their job if the overtime was just predictable and paid.
The structural problem is this prevalent blanket wage system, where overtime is supposedly already factored into your salary, but it's frequently abused, and it allows employers to demand extra, unpredictable, and ultimately unpaid hours that staff find it really difficult to refuse because of the relational cost of saying no.
And crucially, this time inequality falls disproportionately on people with high family responsibilities, especially women. They're constantly navigating the second or third shift of unpaid domestic and emotional labor. That puts them perpetually in the most complex, tangled part of the relational time network. The interwovenness just guarantees that even when you have time off, you lack the autonomy you need for real rest.
Which brings us to the third and maybe the most insidious lock. This is the one that really captures that internal psychological state we saw in your friend from the opening story. Lock 3, fracturedness. The instrumentalization of rest.
Fracturedness. So that's a state of dual disconnection. First, you can't connect deeply to the present moment because of all the digital and cognitive distraction. And second, you're fundamentally chained to this overly imagined, optimized future that actively sucks the value out of the present.
The present moment, the richness of the immediate experience, is just lost. It's caught between the dopamine pull of the digital feedback loop on one side and the relentless, exhausting push toward an idealized tomorrow on the other.
This dynamic is perfectly captured by this concept of cruel optimism.
Yeah, cruel optimism. It's the relentless, exhausting pursuit of an idealized future. Total success, optimization, perfect health, based on this toxic cultural belief that if you just put in enough effort, it guarantees the outcome. It's the belief that if you just hustle hard enough, you will achieve that idealized future society has laid out for you.
And the cruelty is in the consequence. You're forced to sacrifice a real, felt present. We just postpone satisfaction and rest because we see the present moment only as a means to a future end. We're constantly deferred, never allowing ourselves to just arrive in the fullness of the now.
And we see this play out so vividly in the story of Alex, the high-achieving university student. He's at an Ivy League school, and he is laser-focused on getting a top job at a consultancy firm.
Alex treats his body, his entire life, as a machine for production. His rest is completely functionalized and meticulously scheduled. He has specific blocks for meditation, not for stillness, but for cognitive performance improvement. He makes sure his leisure reading has strategic value, and his meals are scientifically optimized for nutrient intake.
His rest is just maintenance. It's a tune-up. But the ultimate expression of this fractured mindset is what he confesses: crushing guilt. When Alex tried to just sit in a park and watch birds, an activity of pure, intrinsic, purposeless leisure, he was just overwhelmed by guilt.
He felt guilty because watching birds was not an efficient use of downtime. It didn't contribute measurably to his future goal of high-level professional success.
His rest has become entirely instrumentalized. It's just another part of the efficiency machine, a required procedure to ensure higher future work output. If an action doesn't serve the machine, it is wasted time. And wasting time in this culture equates to a moral failure. This is the deepest corruption of relational time, where your relationship to your own self is defined purely by your productivity.
And this instrumentalization, it's not just an individual problem. It's an ideology that's systematically imposed in professional and academic settings. We see a really stark illustration of this in what's being called the neoliberal colonization of higher education.
This refers to the experience of an academic whose deep, specialized expertise and, frankly, impressive achievements, teaching awards, major publications on critical pedagogy, were systematically undermined when they applied for an internal leadership position.
They were essentially forced to strip out the substance of their work. The academic was coached to remove all evidence of deep academic impact testimonials, publish book reviews, and replace it with generic, functional descriptions of management techniques and process.
This is that managerial ideology defining what has value. The managers evaluating the application, who often had no academic or teaching experience themselves, they only place value on metrics they could understand. Standardized, quantifiable processes.
And the language itself was actively corrupted through what's identified as managerial newspeak and doublespeak. Newspeak tries to narrow the range of thought by insisting that academic work can only be discussed in this generic managerial language.
So, for example, instead of explaining the emancipatory purpose of their scholarly books, one on critical pedagogies, another a major international handbook, the academic had to describe how they managed their co-authors and strategically leveraged the books as mere training manuals.
The external reviewers weren't interested in the scholarly contributions, which were internationally recognized. They were more interested in how the author made sure their collaborators met deadlines, a basic management technique, than any of the original ideas in the work. The what didn't matter, only the standardized how of the process.
And this just illustrates how the system strips the value from the present experience of work or of rest. Knowledge isn't intrinsically valuable anymore. It's a commodity to be leveraged for the organization's profit. This tyrannical influence of learning objectives reduces complex academic work to decontextualized, standardized techniques, which ultimately de-skills the professional.
The core message of this lock is that our systems only validate actions that feed the systemic, future-focused machine, whether we're working or trying to rest. The fractured relationship with the present moment ensures we never feel integrated or whole.
So if we look back at this whole journey, we've mapped out these three systemic failures that corrupt our relational time. You've got fuzzy boundaries creating this unseen, draining gray labor. Then interwovenness strips our autonomy through connection anxiety and this profound time inequality. And finally, fracturedness instrumentalizes rest and forces us to sacrifice the present for a future that, frankly, may never arrive as planned.
And the implication is just so clear. Winning more hours, more quantity is often just a symbolic victory. It leaves the underlying problem completely untouched. The solution can't be quantitative.
It has to be relational. Escaping this cycle requires a fundamental shift in our focus. We have to start prioritizing relational quality over quantity. We have to focus on the quality of our relationships, with our work, with society, and maybe most importantly, with ourselves.
Because if we gain the whole world of time off, but we maintain this fractured, fuzzy, and interwoven relationship with the very idea of time, we're just going to continue to exhaust ourselves. We'll become those hummingbirds, furiously flapping our wings just to stay in the exact same state of depletion.
The philosopher Joseph Piper offered this anchoring thought that stands in such stark contrast to the instrumentalization we were just talking about. He said, when a person becomes one with himself, mutually coordinating, then is leisurist. A quote, true rest, true leisure is an internal state of harmony and integration. It's a state where the self isn't being manipulated for future gain, but simply is.
That perfectly describes what Alex, the student, was missing. His scheduled meditation and optimization, that was all about self-manipulation, forcing the machine to run better, not about self-coordination or integration.
And this brings us back to a really profound paradox that the psychoanalyst Erich Fromm observed decades ago. He noted that modern people worry endlessly about being too slow. They're obsessed with efficiency to save time. But once they use that efficiency to successfully save time, they often don't know what to do with the saved time, except, and this is his exact phrase, kill the time.
That's the tragic endpoint of optimization, isn't it? We succeed in optimizing ourselves right out of the capacity for genuine, purposeless leisure. We've become so good at valuing the means, the efficiency, that we've completely forgotten the value of the end, which is rest and just intrinsic existence.
The challenge before us, then, is immense. It is not just about winning the battle for more hours in an employment contract. It's the much deeper existential challenge of relearning how to place and protect genuine, purposeless leisure time that is completely free from the demands of efficiency, so that we can reconnect with the dignity and the richness of the present moment itself.